I wasn't supposed to hear the truth, and sometimes I still wonder how different my life would be if my father had remembered to end that call. His voice entered my room like a cold wind sneaking through a cracked window, steady and calm in a way that made my skin crawl as he said, "That old man won't last a day after our Thanksgiving surprise." My mother's low laughter followed a second later, the kind of laugh I'd heard at parties, forced and polished. Only now, it sounded sharpened by something darker as she replied, "The mansion will be ours by Christmas." In that moment, the world around me stopped moving. Grandpa wasn't just a grandfather. He was Samuel Hartman, a man with more property, power, and history than anyone in our family, and hearing my parents speak about him as if he were a problem to be erased rather than a human being broke something inside me. I ended the call with trembling fingers and dialed his number so quickly I almost hit the wrong contact. When he answered soft and warm as always, I whispered, "Grandpa, it's me. Please don't come to dinner," and although he grew quiet, he didn't sound surprised. Instead, he said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll be there, and I won't be alone." For the next 5 days, the Hartman mansion transformed into a glittering stage, set under my mother Victoria's direction. She barked orders at Marian Lopez, who wiped surfaces until they shined like mirrors, and she walked through the halls with her clipboard, adjusting flower petals and candle holders to create the illusion of warmth. My father Daniel rehearsed lines in front of the kitchen window, the way actors prepare for their roles, muttering phrases like, "You look 20 years younger, Dad," or, "We're so grateful you're here," shaping every word to sound sincere, even though sincerity had long since vanished from his voice. I watched them practice their kindness like choreography, every smile rehearsed several times until it carried not a hint of the venom I knew was beneath it. At night, I lay awake listening to whispers drifting from their room. Sometimes my father spoke sharply about timing. Other times, my mother asked whether the wine bottle looked old enough to be convincing. When I passed my father's office one evening, I noticed his laptop still glowing, and on the screen a document was open titled Hartman Property Transfer Draft. I stared at it for several long seconds, unable to breathe as dread curled through me like smoke. They were preparing their future, a future without Samuel Hartman in it, a future they intended to steal. I tried to tell myself I misunderstood, that maybe they were planning something legal, something harmless, but that illusion shattered when my mother told me, "Lily, when your grandfather arrives, you'll pour the first glass of wine. You're his favorite. He'll never suspect a thing." Her smile was brittle, her eyes gleaming as if she were delivering good news. I nodded like an obedient daughter while my heart pounded so loudly I thought she'd hear it echo down the hallway. Later that night, shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone, I called Grandpa again. I told him everything, the whispered plans, the draft document, the way they practice kindness, like it was a performance. When I finished, he didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "You did the right thing. I'm proud of you." And hearing that broke something loose inside me, fear mixed with relief. But when he added, "I'll come, but not alone," I realized the dinner that awaited us wasn't a family gathering. It was a battlefield disguised with linen napkins and candlelight. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a sky the color of brushed steel, the kind of heavy gray that presses against the windows and makes the air feel tighter than it should. Inside the mansion, however, everything sparkled. Victoria insisted on perfection, gliding from the kitchen to the dining room with a manic sort of grace as she checked and rechecked every detail. The table gleamed with polished silver. Linen napkins folded into sharp, dignified shapes sat beside spotless wine glasses. The scent of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and butter floated through the house, but instead of evoking warmth like it had in my childhood, it made my stomach twist. My father Daniel paced near the fireplace, glancing at his watch every few minutes with the restless agitation of someone waiting for a verdict. "He's never late," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. "Your father's always been controlling," Victoria replied while adjusting her necklace, her tone cold and overly sweet. "Let him think he holds the power a little longer." I slipped away to my room and sent Grandpa a text. "Are you still coming? Please be safe." Minutes stretched into nearly an hour without a reply, and each second felt heavier than the last. Sundown approached, casting long amber streaks across the marble floors. Shadows deepened in the halls, and even the chandeliers seemed too bright, as if trying to disguise the dread filling the house. Downstairs, my parents lingered near the windows, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. They looked like a painting of elegance, yet the tension beneath their posture made it impossible not to see the rot inside. Then, at exactly 6 p.m., headlights swept across the driveway. A car approached the front gate, its beams cutting through the cold evening air. Victoria straightened instantly, smoothing her dress and touching her hair, her eyes sparkling with a practiced excitement. "Showtime," she whispered in a tone too rehearsed to be real. Daniel opened the door, expecting to greet a frail old man easily manipulated. Instead, he froze at the sight of Samuel Hartman standing tall in his dark overcoat, his silver hair catching the porch light like a crown. But what made Daniel's face drain of color wasn't Samuel's presence. It was the two people who stepped inside behind him, Miranda Cole in a navy suit carrying a leather briefcase with quiet confidence, and Jason Ward, a broad-shouldered man wearing an earpiece, his expression unreadable. Daniel, Victoria, Grandpa said politely but without warmth, "This is Ms. Cole, my estate attorney, and Mr. Ward, my head of security." Victoria blinked, her voice slipping. "Security for Thanksgiving dinner." "Oh, just a precaution," Grandpa said with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can't be too careful with family these days." His words floated through the air like a blade wrapped in silk. Daniel forced a laugh, rigid and unnatural. "You're joking, right?" Grandpa stepped past him into the living room, pausing just long enough to let his gaze sweep over the table. The polished glasses, the decanter, the wine bottle positioned like a trophy. When his eyes met mine, he gave the smallest nod, so subtle that no one else noticed it, but powerful enough to steady my shaking hands. In that moment, I knew he wasn't here to be hunted. He was here to confront the danger head-on. Dinner began with a stiffness that made every movement feel exaggerated. We took our seats, the golden light from the chandelier shimmering across the table like a spotlight on our charade. Grandpa sat at the head, calm and unreadable, while my parents sat across from him, wearing smiles carved from stone. I was wedged between them, the invisible thread tying all sides of the truth together. When Grandpa asked me to pour the wine, my heart stopped, but I did as he said. And when he gently took the bottle and switched his own glass with my father's without a single tremor of hesitation, I realized he had come prepared for a battle they never expected him to fight. For several minutes after the plates were filled, the room held a stiff, suffocating quiet. Every clink of silverware felt amplified, every breath too loud. The tension coiled beneath the table like a serpent waiting to strike. Grandpa carved his turkey delicately, as if this were any ordinary dinner, then set his utensils down with deliberate calm and said, "Daniel, I hear the Portland office is still struggling. Is that true?" His tone was mild, but beneath it was something sharp enough to draw blood. My father froze for a fraction of a second before forcing a casual shrug, saying, "We're handling it. These things take time." "Interesting," Grandpa murmured, tilting his head just slightly. 30 years of my work and still no progress." The silence that followed crackled thick and dangerous. Victoria jumped in with a brittle smile, saying, "Henry, maybe tonight we focus on family instead of business," but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Grandpa nodded slowly, replying, "You're right, Victoria. Let's talk about family." The words landed like a hammer placed gently on the table, their weight impossible to ignore. He turned his gaze toward me, and although his eyes softened briefly, there was something resolute behind them as he said, "Lily, my dear, you've grown so much. I'd like to see how steady your hands are. My fingers trembled as I reached for the bottle, but I poured the wine with as much control as I could muster. When I reached his glass, he raised a hand, whispering, "Allow me." He poured his own wine, then so seamlessly that only Jason and I seemed to notice, he switched his glass with my father's. The exchange took less than a breath, yet it changed everything in the room. Victoria didn't see it. Daniel didn't see it. But I did, and suddenly, the cold dread inside me shifted into a strange, fragile hope. We ate in silence until Grandpa placed his fork down again. His eyes met my father's, and his voice softened into something far more dangerous than anger. When Margaret was alive, he said, referring to my grandmother, she used to remind us that Thanksgiving was about gratitude, about appreciating what we have, not taking what isn't ours. Daniel stiffened. "We appreciate everything you've given us," he said with a strained smile. "Don't we, Victoria?" She nodded too quickly, saying, "Of course we do," good Grandpa said, "because I've been thinking about legacy, about who deserves to carry it forward." Then he looked directly at me, adding, "Lily has integrity. She doesn't lie. She doesn't steal." The air cracked in half. Daniel gripped his knife until his knuckles turned white. "What exactly are you implying?" he asked, voice tight. Grandpa leaned back, his expression unchanging. "I'm not implying anything, Daniel. I'm simply reminding you that greed has consequences." He raised his glass. "To family." Daniel hesitated but forced himself to lift the glass, the one that had been switched. He drank deeply. For an instant, nothing happened. Then the color drained from his face. His breathing hitched. His hand started trembling around the glass. What did you do?" he gasped. Grandpa's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "Nothing serious. Just a mild sedative. Enough to let you feel for a moment what it's like to have no control, to understand the fear you intended for me." Victoria shot from her chair, screaming, "Henry, how dare you? You're insane." "Am I?" Grandpa asked, his voice rising with steel for the first time. "Or is it justice?" Victoria backed away, eyes wild. "You can't prove anything." "Actually," he said, turning to Jason with a small nod, "I can." Jason tapped his tablet and a video flickered to life on the massive TV behind us, a recording of my parents' voices discussing their plan, their greed, their cruelty. Every word echoed through the room like a confession shouted in a cathedral. Victoria paled. Daniel swayed as the sedative tightened its grip. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. "I didn't bug your phones," Grandpa replied. "You forgot to hang up. Lily heard everything. She called me right after." Their heads snapped toward me, and Victoria hissed, "You told him." I swallowed but didn't look away as I said I saved his life. Someone had to. Daniel slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "You stupid girl, you ruined everything." "No," Grandpa said, rising to his feet, his presence suddenly enormous. "You ruined yourselves." The room fell into a terrible stillness after Grandpa's words, as if even the air didn't dare move. Miranda quietly opened her leather folder, her movements precise and almost serene amid the chaos unraveling across the table. She laid out a series of documents with crisp, practiced gestures, while Daniel's breath grew ragged, and Victoria clutched the back of her chair as though it might keep her from collapsing. Miranda said, in a voice steady as glass, "As of this morning, Mr. Samuel Hartman has transferred full ownership of the Hartman Mansion and related assets into a charitable foundation, the Hartman Legacy Trust, under the management of Lily Hartman." Victoria gasped, as if struck, whispering, You gave it to her." Grandpa shook his head slowly and replied, "Not gave, entrusted. There's a difference." Daniel leaned forward, weaving slightly as the sedative deepened its hold. His voice cracked as he said, "You can't just erase us from everything. We're your blood." Grandpa stepped toward him, each stride calm despite the storm around us, and said, "Blood means nothing without honor. You plotted to kill me for money, Daniel. Your own father. And you think being blood is enough to excuse that." Daniel's face contorted with a mixture of fear and fury. "You drove me to it. You controlled everything, my life, my work, every decision. You never trusted me with anything." Grandpa's voice thundered through the dining room louder than I had ever heard it. "You wanted my empire. You wanted my name. And instead of earning them, you tried to steal them by ending my life." Victoria covered her ears, shaking her head back and forth as if refusing the reality unraveling in front of her. "Stop it," she pleaded, her voice quivering. "Please stop." But Grandpa didn't. His anger wasn't wild or reckless. It was the kind of righteous fury that arrives only after years of disappointment and heartbreak. "You thought you were entitled to everything I built. You thought money could replace morality. But you built your future on a foundation of greed, and tonight it collapses." Jason took a single silent step forward. "Mr. Hartman, shall I escort them out?" Grandpa nodded once. "They no longer belong in this house." What happened next unfolded like a slow-motion nightmare. Jason led my parents toward the door while Miranda gathered her documents. Daniel tried to argue, but the sedative slurred his words until they fell apart. Victoria's tears streaked down her cheeks as she pleaded, "Lily, please say something. Tell him we didn't mean it," but her voice sounded hollow even to herself. I couldn't speak. My throat had sealed shut. All I could do was watch the two people who raised me turn into strangers I no longer recognized. The moment the front door closed behind them, the entire house seemed to exhale. Grandpa sank back into his chair, exhaustion finally cracking through his composure. "Justice," he murmured, staring at the untouched wine in front of him. "That's the real Thanksgiving gift." I took his hand gently, my voice trembling as I whispered, "You didn't just save your life tonight. You saved mine too." Outside on the driveway, muffled shouting erupted as Daniel and Victoria began to turn on each other, their accusations cutting through the night like broken glass. I watched them through the window, unable to look away, hearing Victoria scream, "You promised it would work," and Daniel hiss back, "It was your idea." Their perfect partnership, the facade they showed, the world disintegrated right there on the frozen stone. Grandpa stood beside me and said quietly, "Evil never stays united, Lily. It always turns on itself." Moments later, red and blue lights flooded the driveway. 2 police cars rolled in, tires crackling on gravel. Officer Logan Price stepped inside with calm authority. "Mr. Hartman, we received your report. Are these the individuals you mentioned?" Grandpa nodded. "Yes. My son and his wife. They tried to harm me." Everything happened quickly after that. Victoria's purse revealed the small glass vial of powdered sedative. The officers read their charges, attempted assault and conspiracy. Victoria screamed. Daniel didn't fight, and I, heartbroken, trembling, looked at them and whispered, "I can't save you from yourselves." After the patrol cars disappeared through the iron gates, silence settled over the mansion in a way that felt heavier than any storm. The dining room, once set for celebration, now looked like the remains of a war. Candles flickered in tired pools of wax. Silverware sat untouched beside plates that had gone cold. The faint smell of rosemary and turkey lingered, but it no longer carried the warmth of the holiday. It smelled like memory, one we would never forget. Grandpa lowered himself into the armchair near the fireplace, his hands trembling slightly despite the calm on his face. I sank into the chair beside him, unable to stop replaying the police lights flashing across my parents' faces as they were led away. "Did you sleep?" I asked softly the next morning, though I already knew the answer. He managed a faint smile. I closed my eyes. But sleep? No. I nodded slowly. Me neither. A few hours later, our doorbell rang again, this time without drama. Detective Marcus Hale arrived carrying a small stack of folders. He spoke to Grandpa with a measured, respectful tone as he said, "Mr. Hartman, we've charged both suspects. There's sufficient evidence for attempted homicide and conspiracy." He glanced at me before continuing, "Your granddaughter is not involved in any wrongdoing. In fact, she's the primary reason you're alive tonight." Grandpa placed a hand on mine, squeezing gently. There was pride in his eyes, but sorrow too, a sadness that comes when love survives while family does not. When Marcus left, Grandpa let out a long exhale, the kind that seemed to release decades of tension. Sometimes, the truth feels cruel, he said, voice steady but quiet, but it still sets us free, even when it hurts. The days that followed blurred into a strange rhythm. News vans clustered outside our gates. Headlines declared the scandal with bold letters. Billionaire Samuel Hartman survives alleged poisoning. Attempt by son and daughter-in-law. Calls from board members flooded the house. Grandpa refused every interview, repeating the same simple phrase: justice doesn't need an audience. It just needs peace. Meanwhile, Assistant District Attorney Karen Brooks worked with their lawyers to draft a plea deal. 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service at a senior care home, no contact with Grandpa or me for 5 years. The tabloids called it lenient, but Grandpa accepted the deal without hesitation. Not because I pity them, he said firmly, but because this story needs to end somewhere. I will not let hatred run my life. We tried to build a new normal after that. Winter rolled over Portland, blanketing the gardens in soft frost. Inside, life felt quieter, gentler. One evening, Grandpa and I decorated the tall Christmas tree in the great room the same way Grandma Margaret used to when I was little. I held up 2 ribbons, silver and gold, and asked, "Which one?" He smiled faintly, a soft sadness in his eyes. "Silver. Gold feels like the past." When we placed the final ornament, Grandma's wedding photo, at the top of the tree, he stepped back and admired the glow. "She would have loved this," he murmured. Later that night, he handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a single key with a brass tag engraved with the Hartman Legacy Foundation. My breath caught. "Grandpa, I'm not ready." He shook his head gently. "Lily leadership isn't about knowing everything. It's about choosing truth when it costs you something. You did that, and you'll do it again." Tears blurred my vision as I hugged him. For the first time in months, I felt whole, not because everything was perfect, but because what remained was real. As snow began drifting past the windows, I realized something important. Family isn't defined by blood or last names. It's defined by who stands beside you when the world fractures. As Grandpa dozed in his chair, the fire crackling softly, I whispered a promise to myself I would honor his legacy, not through wealth or reputation, but through integrity, through truth, through courage. Maybe one day when people heard the name Hartman, they wouldn't think of betrayal, they would think of redemption. If this story moved you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And if you have thoughts or reflections of your own, I'd love to hear them in the comments below.